The East Room of the White House pulsed with restless energy. Cameras flashed, microphones squeaked, and reporters jostled for space as President Donald Trump approached the podium. Outside, rain tapped against the tall windows, a steady rhythm underscoring the tension inside. Among the crowd stood Daniel Carter, a 32-year-old reporter from a mid-tier news outlet. He wasn't a star correspondent, but today he carried something heavier than a notebook. For weeks, anger had boiled inside him, anger rooted not in politics, but in loss. Trump adjusted the microphone, his voice steady. We've gathered today to talk about new community initiative programs designed to help families, veterans, and small businesses across the country. The words floated across the room, meant to inspire. But to Daniel, they rang hollow. He thought of his father, a veteran who had struggled for years before passing away, broken by the very system that had promised to care for him. Daniel's grip on his pen tightened until it nearly tore the page. Before he could stop himself, his voice cut through the room. Mr. President, why should anyone believe a single word of what you're saying? The press corps froze. Cameras swung toward him. Gasps whispered across the room. Interrupting a president mid-speech was bold, reckless even. Trump's eyes locked onto Daniel's. He didn't snap back. He didn't sneer. Instead, his expression shifted to something unreadable. What's your name? He asked. Daniel Carter. All right, Daniel. You sound upset. Why don't you tell me and everyone here what's on your mind? The room tilted. Reporters leaned forward. This wasn't the usual sparring. This was different. Daniel's throat tightened, but the memory of his father fueled him. My dad was a veteran. He served this country faithfully. When he came back, he struggled financially, emotionally, medically. He begged for help, but the programs never worked. He felt invisible. And now he's gone. So forgive me if I don't buy another promise. The silence was thick. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Trump didn't look to his notes, didn't glance at staff. His eyes stayed on Daniel. His voice softened. Daniel, I'm sorry for your loss. Truly, and I'd like to hear more about your father. The shift in the room was immediate. This wasn't theater. This was raw. You want to hear about my dad? Daniel asked, stunned. Yes, Trump replied simply. Anger comes from somewhere. Tell us where. Daniel swallowed hard. Images of his father flooded back. Weather hands, weary eyes, stubborn pride. His name was Richard Carter. He enlisted at 18, fought overseas, and came back believing this country cared for him. But he couldn't find work. The VA made him wait months, sometimes years. He felt invisible. One night, he told me he regretted coming back at all. A hush fell. Even the most hardened reporters lowered their cameras. Trump's voice was steady, almost gentle. And what did you feel when he said that? Daniel's voice cracked. Powerless. Angry. Like every promise I've ever heard was just words. Words that never came in time. Trump nodded slowly. That anger you feel, that's the same anger I hear from thousands of Americans. But today you gave it a face. Your father's face. For the first time, Daniel's fury collided with something unexpected. Compassion. My dad used to say, Daniel whispered, that the hardest part of service wasn't war. It was coming home and realizing you were forgotten. The room was silent. One reporter in the back wiped her eyes. Trump leaned forward. Daniel, if your father were here today, what would you want him to know? Not from me, but from you as a son. The question struck like a blow. Daniel's chest tightened. I'd tell him I was proud, that I never stopped being proud, even when he felt worthless, that I wish I had told him more while he was alive. Trump let the words linger before replying. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought after the uniform comes off. Your father wasn't worthless, Daniel. He was a hero who deserved better. The East Room no longer felt like a press conference. It felt like a conversation, one that cut deeper than politics. Daniel exhaled, his anger softened but not gone. He pressed again. Words are powerful, Mr. President. But what about actions? What about people like my father who never got the help they needed? Trump nodded. Fair question. Words without action are just noise. But anger, When turned into action, that's where change begins. Every program, every policy, it isn't about numbers. It's about fathers like yours, mothers working 2 jobs, and kids wondering if anyone's listening. And I'll admit, the room was still, cameras humming as Daniel fixed his eyes on the president. Government fails too often, Trump admitted, his tone uncharacteristically steady. But we can't stop trying. Daniel studied him, searching for the usual flash of arrogance. To his surprise, he saw none. From the back, an older journalist whispered under his breath, "Asterisk, this feels different." Asterisk. Daniel's grip on the microphone tightened. His voice cut through the silence. "If you mean that, Mr. President, then prove it. Don't let other families feel what mine did." Trump leaned forward, the room holding its breath. "Then I'll make you a promise," he said slowly. "Not as a politician, but as a man. I'll look into your father's case personally, and I'll make sure his story shapes the changes we make going forward." Gasps rippled across the press room. It wasn't the answer Daniel expected, and yet, for the first time in years, his anger cracked open just enough for something else to slip through. Hope, fragile but real, a memory surged. Daniel was 15, sitting beside his father in their cramped living room. Richard Carter struggled with trembling hands to sign his disability claim, sweat beating at his temple. "They don't care, Danny," he muttered, voice thick with defeat. "We're just numbers on a page. Fighting this system is harder than fighting a war." Back then, Daniel had felt helpless, caged by his own youth, powerless to ease his father's suffering. The memory faded, pulling him back into the harsh brightness of the East Room. He blinked quickly, realizing tears threatened to betray him. Trump noticed, but didn't point it out. Instead, the president said, "Your father's story isn't just yours. It belongs to millions. And sometimes it takes one voice, angry or not, to remind us what's real." Daniel barely registered the cameras anymore. For the first time, his father's name, Richard Carter had been spoken in the nation's most powerful room. It wouldn't vanish into silence. That thought alone shifted something deep inside him. Not everyone welcomed the moment. A rival reporter's hand shot up. "Mr. President, with respect, are you turning this press conference into a therapy session? We're here for policy, not personal stories." The words cut like glass. Daniel's stomach twisted. Maybe she was right. Had he turned his grief into a spectacle? But Trump remained calm. Every policy affects people. If we can't see the people behind the policies, then what are we doing here? The reporter rolled her eyes, but Daniel noticed something startling. Several journalists frowned at her dismissiveness, as if she had missed the entire point. A veteran leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "Asterisk, she doesn't get it." Asterisk. Trump turned back to Daniel. "You gave us more today than statistics ever could. Don't let anyone tell you your father's story doesn't matter." Something shifted in Daniel. His anger was giving way to dignity. For the first time, he realized speaking up wasn't reckless. It was necessary. He swallowed hard, surprising himself as his voice cracked. "I wasn't always proud of my dad," he admitted quietly. "When I was younger, I resented him. He couldn't keep jobs. He missed school events because of his back pain. Sometimes he snapped at me. I thought he was weak. I didn't understand the war was still haunting him." The room fell silent. "I only realized after he was gone," Daniel continued, his voice trembling, "that he was carrying battles I couldn't see. Now, I'd give anything for one more chance to tell him I understood. Maybe that's why I came here angry today. Because I couldn't yell at him anymore, so I yelled at you." Trump's reply came softly. "Daniel, you're not alone. Millions of sons and daughters carry regrets about words left unsaid. But your father knew you loved him. A man doesn't serve his country without believing he's protecting his family." That was his way of saying it back. Tears stung Daniel's eyes. He wiped them quickly, embarrassed. But instead of ridicule, he felt something else in the room. Empathy. He hadn't expected confession to bring healing. Yet here it was. Then the silence broke, not with questions, but with something unheard of in a press briefing. Applause. It started small, a few tentative claps. Then it spread, echoing through the East Room as reporters, staffers, even camera operators joined in. Daniel froze, stunned. Applause wasn't for reporters. It was for presidents, for policy announcements. Yet here it was, directed at him, for daring to speak his father's truth. Trump didn't silence the crowd. Instead, he turned to Daniel. That applause is for your father, for Richard Carter, and for every veteran who came home and never got the respect they deserved. Daniel's chest tightened. He bowed his head slightly, overwhelmed. For the first time, grief no longer felt like a chain. It felt like a torch. Daniel whispered to himself, "Dad, they finally heard you." The applause faded, but the silence that followed carried weight. Trump spoke again, his voice deliberate. "Let today be a reminder. Anger can tear a room apart. But honesty can bring it together." For the first time in years, Daniel felt peace settle in his chest. What he didn't realize then was that this moment wasn't just healing for him. It was about to ripple outward. By the next morning, clips of the press conference dominated every network. But the headlines weren't the usual partisan sound bites. Instead, they read, "Reporter confronts Trump, emotional exchange moves nation. Veteran son breaks silence in White House." Daniel sat in his small apartment, stunned as he watched himself replay on screen. He hadn't wanted attention. He had wanted answers. Yet now his father's name, Richard Carter, echoed across America. His phone buzzed endlessly. Messages poured in, colleagues, strangers, distant relatives. Some accused him of grandstanding. Many thanked him for saying what they'd always felt but never voiced. One message hit him hardest. A young woman from Texas wrote, "My brother was a veteran who felt invisible, too. Thank you for reminding the world that behind every statistic is a human being. You gave him a voice." Daniel leaned back, overwhelmed. His anger hadn't just cracked open his grief. It had given others permission to face their own. On TV, the clip replayed again and again. Trump's calm words. "That applause is for your father, for every veteran who came home and didn't get the respect they deserved." For once, Daniel realized this wasn't about politics. It was about people. And maybe, just maybe, his father's story had grown bigger than his pain. 2 days later, his phone rang. "Mr. Carter, this is the White House. The president would like to invite you to a round-table discussion with veterans and their families next week. He wants you there." Daniel nearly dropped the phone. Him? A mid-tier reporter with no clout? Suspicion flared. Was this optics? His father's memory twisted into a prop? But then he remembered Trump's eyes during the press conference. Steady, empathetic, uncalculated. "I'll be there," Daniel said. The following week, he walked into a White House room filled with veterans, men and women of every generation, some in wheelchairs, some with medals, some with only the weight of silence. Their families sat beside them, carrying both pride and grief. Trump entered, greeting each person before turning to Daniel. "Thank you for coming. Today isn't about me. It's about listening to them and to you." Daniel's throat tightened. For the first time, his father's story didn't feel like a wound. It felt like part of movement. The discussion began. Veterans spoke of endless paperwork, denied claims battles with PTSD. A Vietnam vet's voice cracked. "I gave this country my youth. When I came back, all I got was silence." A young Iraq veteran added, "Sometimes the war never ends. It just changes battlefields. The fight moves inside your own mind." Daniel clenched his fist beneath the table. Every story echoed his father's. Then Trump turned to him. "Daniel, you've carried this anger for years. What needs to change?" Dozens of eyes fixed on him. He wasn't used to offering solutions, only questions. But he spoke anyway. "Don't treat veterans like case numbers. Treat them like people. Speed up the help they need. Give families someone who listens, not just forms to fill out. And above all, don't let them feel invisible." Murmurs of agreement spread through the room. Trump nodded, jotting notes. In that moment, Daniel realized something extraordinary. His father's story wasn't just being remembered. It was shaping the conversation. That night, Daniel sat alone on a bench outside the White House. The city buzzed around him, but inside he felt still lighter. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Dad, I hope you're hearing this." A voice startled him. "Mind if I sit?" It was Trump, no aides, no cameras. Just him. Daniel blinked. Of course. Trump sat, gazing out at the city lights. You know, leadership isn't about always having the answers. Sometimes it's about being willing to listen, even when it hurts. Daniel studied him carefully. But will anything really change? Or will this just fade like another headline? Trump turned to him, tone firm. It will change if people like you keep telling the truth. Anger alone can't fix a system, but honesty can. Daniel swallowed, realizing something profound. The burden wasn't only on politicians. It was on everyone who carried a story to keep it alive. For the first time, he didn't feel powerless. He felt responsible. Weeks later, an envelope arrived in Daniel's mailbox. The return address, the White House. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a typed letter, signed in bold ink, Donald J. Trump. Daniel, it read, "Your father's story has already made an impact. Because of what you shared, I've ordered a review of veteran claims processing times. A task force will be created to cut delays so no family feels forgotten. This won't be fixed overnight, but it's a start, and it began with you. Your father, Richard Carter, will not be forgotten." Tears blurred Daniel's vision. For years he had carried anger like armor, convinced no one cared. Now, here was proof, written proof, that his father's voice had sparked change. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in the same box that held his father's medals. For the first time, the box didn't feel like a coffin for memories. It felt like a legacy. Not everyone saw it that way. Critics mocked him online. Reporter falls for stagecraft. Empty promises dress as empathy. His old anger simmered. Had he been naive? Was the letter just politics? Over coffee, his colleague Megan leaned in. "Daniel, you've covered politics long enough to know there's always spin. But ask yourself, did your father's story matter that day? Did people listen who never would have before?" Daniel hesitated, then admitted, "Yes." "Then that's bigger than politics," she said. Her words stuck. Maybe cynicism was easy. Maybe hope, even fragile hope, was braver. That evening, his mother called, her voice trembling. "Danny," I saw the clip again. "Your father would be so proud. For years I prayed someone would listen, and you made them listen." Daniel's throat tightened. "I just wish I'd done it sooner." "No," she said firmly. "You did it when the world needed to hear it." For the first time, his guilt eased. Maybe he hadn't failed his father after all. Maybe he had honored him in the only way he could, by giving silence a voice. Months later, Daniel sat in the back of another White House briefing. Trump stepped to the podium. "Today, we are announcing a new initiative to drastically reduce delays in veteran health care and support. Families should not wait months or years for answers. They deserve action." The room erupted with questions, but Daniel froze as Trump added, "This began because of a man named Richard Carter, a veteran who served his country but struggled to be seen. His son reminded us that behind every policy is a person, and we must never forget that." Daniel's chest tightened. His father's name had been spoken again, not as a statistic, but as a catalyst for change. Veterans and families sought him out afterward. "Your father's story is our story," one man said. "You spoke for all of us," a woman whispered. Later, as Daniel walked toward the exit, he heard a voice call his name. Trump stood there, smiling faintly. "Your father will be proud," he said. "And so am I." Daniel swallowed hard. "Thank you for listening." This time, when Trump extended his hand, Daniel didn't hesitate. He shook it, not as reporter and politician, but as two men who had shared a moment of truth. Weeks later, Daniel visited his father's grave. The cemetery was quiet, pine needles scattered across the headstone. Richard Carter, beloved father, faithful soldier. Kneeling, Daniel brushed the stone clean. "Dad, they finally heard you. Your story didn't end in silence. It sparked something. And I'm sorry it took me so long to see the hero you were." His voice cracked as he laid the White House letter beside the flowers. This isn't just my fight anymore. It belongs to every veteran who feels invisible. I promise I'll keep telling your story. The wind stirred through the trees, carrying away the weight that bound him for years. Anger no longer crushed him. It had been transformed into purpose. Months became a year, but the moment in the press room never faded. Schools studied it. Families of veterans shared it. What began as confrontation became something larger. A story of grief turned into change. Daniel returned to reporting, but with new eyes. He no longer chased outrage alone. He chased truth, healing voices unheard. And whenever doubt crept in, he remembered that day when anger collided with compassion, and the world listened. In the end, it wasn't about Trump. It wasn't even about politics. It was about a father and a son, and a room full of people who realized that sometimes the greatest change begins not with power, but with pain spoken out loud. One night, Daniel closed his notebook and wrote the final words of his father's story. Richard Carter was more than a veteran. He was proof that one life, one voice, can echo across a nation if someone is brave enough to speak. And in that truth, Daniel finally found peace.